December 20th, 1943, 2:23 in the afternoon, 20,000 feet above northern Germany, Second Lieutenant Charlie Brown's left hand is frozen to the control yoke of his B-17 Flying Fortress. Blood streams down his face from shrapnel wounds. His co-pilot is unconscious. His tail gunner is dead. The nose of his bomber looks like Swiss cheese. 360 bullet holes have transformed Ye Olde Pub into a flying coffin. And now, sliding into position off his right wing, comes a Messerschmitt Bf 109. The German fighter's cannons are aimed directly at the bomber's cockpit. Charlie Brown closes his eyes and waits for death. But the cannons never fire. What happens next will remain a secret for 40 years. A story so extraordinary that when it finally comes to light, historians will struggle to believe it. Because on this frozen December afternoon, two enemy pilots are about to redefine what honor means in the middle of humanity's deadliest conflict. The mission had started before dawn at RAF Kimballton in England. Charlie Brown, just 21 years old from West Virginia, was flying his first mission as aircraft commander. His B-17, nicknamed Ye Olde Pub by its crew, was part of a massive formation, 475 heavy bombers heading for the Focke-Wulf aircraft factory in Bremen, Germany. The crew of Ye Olde Pub was a mix of experience and fresh faces. In the nose, Bombardier Robert Doc Anderson and navigator Al Saddlebags, Sadok, plotted their course. Engineer and top turret gunner Eugene Jenkinson monitored the engines. Radio operator Richard Pechout maintained communications. Ball turret gunner Sam Blackie Blackford curled into his cramped plexiglass sphere beneath the aircraft. Waist gunners Lloyd Fougeroux and Russ Wheely manned the 50-caliber machine guns on either side of the fuselage. And in the loneliest position of all, the tail, sat Hugh Eckie Eckenrode, separated from his crewmates by the length of the entire aircraft. If you're watching this documentary about one of World War II's most remarkable encounters, take a moment to subscribe to the Old Breed channel. We bring you the untold stories of courage that shaped history. Bremen was a nightmare target. The city bristled with anti-aircraft guns. Over 250 flak batteries surrounded the industrial heart of northern Germany. Fighter bases dotted the countryside. The Luftwaffe kept some of its best pilots here, defending the Reich's industrial capacity. As Ye Olde Pub approached Bremen at 27,300 feet, the temperature inside the unpressurized bomber plummeted to minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Ice formed on oxygen masks. Fingers stuck to metal. The men wore electrically heated suits, but the cold still penetrated everything. At 11:55 that morning, the flak started. Black puffs of smoke erupted around the formation like deadly flowers blooming in the sky. Each explosion sent out waves of shrapnel traveling at 3,000 feet per second. There was no dodging flak. You simply flew through it and prayed. Ye Olde Pub was number 6 in the lead squadron's formation, flying in what bomber crews called Purple Heart Corner, the most exposed position. As they began their bomb run, flying straight and level despite the flak, disaster struck. An 88mm shell exploded directly in front of the bomber. Shrapnel tore through the nose, shattering the plexiglass and wounding navigator Al Sadok in the face. More metal fragments peppered the cockpit, hitting Charlie Brown in the right shoulder. The number 2 engine burst into flames. Then the number 4 engine failed, but they stayed on course. At 12:10, Bombardier Doc Anderson released their payload, 10 500-pound bombs tumbling toward the Focke-Wulf factory below. Mission complete. Now they just had to get home. As Ye Olde Pub banked away from the target, German fighters descended on the crippled bomber formation like wolves. Focke-Wulf 190 fighters and Messerschmitt 109s attacked from every angle. With 2 engines out, Ye Olde Pub couldn't maintain formation speed. They began falling behind. Being alone in the sky over Germany was a death sentence for a bomber crew. 8 Focke-Wulf 190s concentrated their attack on the struggling flying fortress. They came in from 12 o'clock high, directly at the nose, their 4 20mm cannons and 2 13mm machine guns blazing. In the top turret, Jenks returned fire, his twin 50 calibers hammering away. Blackie, spinning in his ball turret, tracked targets below. The waist gunners swiveled their weapons, brass shell casings piling at their feet. A Focke-Wulf's cannon shells found their mark. They punched through the bomber's thin aluminum skin and exploded inside the fuselage. Lloyd Fougeroux, the left waist gunner, screamed as shrapnel tore into his body. Another burst destroyed the radio compartment. Richard Pechout was blown backward, wounded but alive. In the tail, Hugh Eckenrode fought alone against fighters attacking from behind. His twin 50 calibers chattered steadily. Then a 20mm cannon shell struck him directly in the head. The tail guns fell silent. The bomber's No. 3 engine sputtered and died. Only one engine remained fully functional on the massive bomber. Ye Olde Pub was dying. A Focke-Wulf came in from 6 o'clock low, raking the bomber's belly with cannon fire. Shells tore into the ball turret. The plexiglass shattered. Hydraulic fluid sprayed everywhere. Blackie, trapped in the destroyed turret, was hit in the back. The turret's motor died, freezing it in position with Blackie hanging upside down, wounded and unable to move. Charlie Brown fought to control the dying bomber. The damaged tail surfaces barely responded. The nose began dropping. They entered a death spiral, spinning toward the earth from 24,000 feet. Brown pulled back on the control yoke with all his strength. Nothing. The ground rushed up at them. 20,000 feet, 15,000, 10,000. At 1,000 feet, something miraculous happened. The bomber's nose suddenly came up. The spinning stopped. They leveled out so low that Brown could see individual trees whipping past. But their ordeal wasn't over. The fighters had followed them down. Brown nursed the crippled bomber in a slow climb, trying to gain altitude for the long journey home. The crew worked desperately to save their wounded comrades. Jenks climbed down from his turret to help extract Blackie from the destroyed ball turret. It took 3 men to pull him free. His back was peppered with shrapnel, but he was alive. They found Hugh Eckenrode dead at his tail gun position. There was nothing they could do for him. As Ye Olde Pub struggled to climb, passing through 3,000 feet, Brown noticed something alarming. The bomber's nose was shredded. He could see daylight through hundreds of holes. The entire front section looked like it had been attacked by a giant ice pick. How the aircraft was still flying defied physics. That's when Franz Stigler appeared. Stigler was 28 years old, a veteran Luftwaffe pilot with 27 confirmed victories, just 3 short of earning the Knight's Cross, Germany's highest military honor. He had been refueling and rearming at his base near Bremen when he saw the damaged B-17 limping along at 3,000 feet. An easy kill. One more victory toward his Knight's Cross. Stigler took off alone and quickly caught up to the struggling bomber. As he approached from behind, he could see the shattered tail gun position, the dead gunner visible through the destroyed plexiglass. He moved closer, finger on the trigger. But something made him hesitate. Flying alongside the bomber's fuselage, Stigler could see directly into the aircraft through the massive holes in its skin. He saw the wounded men. He saw the crew desperately trying to save their comrades. He saw blood on the fuselage walls. He pulled up alongside the cockpit and looked directly at Charlie Brown. The American pilot's face was covered in blood. Brown turned and saw the German fighter inches from his wingtip. Their eyes met. What happened in that moment transcended nationality, transcended war, transcended every order both men had been given. Franz Stigler had lost his brother August, also a pilot, earlier in the war. Before that, he had flown as a commercial pilot, ferrying passengers safely across Europe. He had been taught by one of Germany's greatest fighter aces, Gustav Rödel, who had told him, "You follow the rules of war for you, not for your enemy. You fight by rules to keep your humanity." Rödel had said something else that now echoed in Stigler's mind. "If I ever hear of you shooting at a man in a parachute, I will shoot you myself." Looking at the destroyed B-17 was like looking at a man in a parachute. This wasn't combat anymore. It would be murder. Stigler made a decision that could have cost him his life. Instead of shooting down Ye Olde Pub, he decided to escort it to safety. He pulled back in front of the bomber and waggled his wings, the universal aviation signal for "follow me." Brown, certain this was a trick, refused to follow. Why would a German fighter pilot help them? Stigler tried again, gesturing toward Sweden, which was neutral territory. If the Americans could reach Sweden, they would be interned, but safe. Brown, determined to get his crew home to England, shook his head and kept flying west. For several minutes, this surreal dance continued. A German fighter escorting an American bomber across northern Germany. Any German anti-aircraft crew seeing them would assume the bomber had been captured and was being escorted to a German airfield. It was the perfect camouflage. As they approached the North Sea coast, Stigler knew he had done all he could. He pulled up one last time alongside the cockpit. Charlie Brown watched as the German pilot looked directly at him, raised his hand in salute, then peeled away and headed back toward Germany. "Did that really just happen?" co-pilot Spencer Luke asked, having regained consciousness. Brown could hardly believe it himself. A German fighter pilot, their sworn enemy, had just saved their lives. Ye Olde Pub struggled across the North Sea for another 2 hours. With only 1.5 engines working, they flew at wave-top height. Salt spray coated the windscreen. Every minute, Brown expected the bomber to simply stop flying and crash into the freezing waters. But Ye Olde Pub refused to die. At 3:30 in the afternoon, the impossible happened. The English coast appeared through the haze. They had made it, but landing the destroyed bomber would require another miracle. Brown headed for the first airfield he saw, RAF seething near the coast. The hydraulic system was destroyed, so they had to manually crank down the landing gear. Brown didn't know if the gear was locked. He didn't know if the damaged tail would hold together during landing. He didn't even know if he had enough control to line up with the runway. Coming in on final approach, Ye Olde Pub looked like it shouldn't be flying. Ground crews stopped what they were doing and stared. The bomber was more holes than airplane. How was it still in the air? Brown touched down hard. The bomber bounced, veered left, then right. But the landing gear held. The tail stayed attached. They rolled to a stop. All the surviving crew members except Hugh Eckenrode made it home that day. When medics pulled Charlie Brown from the cockpit, they counted 28 separate wounds on his body from shrapnel and plexiglass fragments. The doctor who examined Ye Olde Pub stopped counting the bullet holes at 360. He estimated there were at least 500 holes in the aircraft. It was, he said, the most damaged bomber he'd ever seen that still managed to return. But here's where the story takes another extraordinary turn. Charlie Brown reported everything about the mission, except the part about the German fighter escort. He told his commanding officers that the German pilot had broken off his attack for unknown reasons. Why didn't he tell the truth? Because he was protecting Franz Stigler. Brown knew that if the story got out, even through Allied propaganda, it would somehow filter back to Germany. The Luftwaffe would identify Stigler as the pilot who had allowed an enemy bomber to escape. In Nazi Germany, that was treason. Stigler would be executed. So Charlie Brown kept the secret. Franz Stigler kept the same secret on his side. He never told anyone about escorting the B-17 to safety. He never claimed it as a victory. He simply reported that he had engaged an enemy bomber but lost it in the haze. His fellow pilots laughed at him for losing such an easy target. He let them laugh. The war continued. Charlie Brown flew 26 more combat missions. He finished his tour and returned to America. Franz Stigler kept flying, eventually being shot down multiple times himself, surviving the war with 28 confirmed victories, one short of the 29 he could have had. After the war, both men tried to return to normal life. Brown stayed in the Air Force, retiring as a lieutenant colonel. He never spoke about December 20th, even to his family. But the memory haunted him. Who was that German pilot? Why had he spared them? Stigler emigrated to Canada in 1953, starting a new life far from the ruins of Germany. He too kept silent about that December day. Some secrets were too dangerous to share, even after the war. For 40 years, both men carried this secret. Then, in 1986, Charlie Brown attended a reunion of B-17 pilots. After a few drinks, he finally told the story of the German fighter pilot who had saved his crew. His fellow pilots didn't believe him. It sounded like something from a movie, not real life. But Brown was determined to find out what happened to that German pilot. In 1990, he took out an ad in a German veterans newsletter. He described the incident, providing just enough details that the right person would recognize the story, but not enough to identify anyone specifically. Franz Stigler was living in Vancouver, Canada, when a friend sent him the newsletter. Reading Brown's description, Stigler couldn't believe it. After 4 decades, the American pilot was looking for him. But how could he be sure it was real? It could be someone trying to expose him, even after all these years. Stigler wrote a cautious letter to Brown, asking for more details about the incident. He specifically asked about something only the 2 pilots would know: what had happened after he escorted the bomber to the coast. Brown wrote back immediately, describing exactly how Stigler had saluted before breaking away. That detail had never been shared with anyone. It was him. After 47 years, Franz Stigler and Charlie Brown were back in contact. Their first phone conversation lasted over 3 hours. Both men wept as they relived that December day. Brown finally learned why Stigler had spared them. Stigler finally learned that his act of mercy had saved 8 American lives. In 1990, Charlie Brown flew to Vancouver to meet Franz Stigler in person. The media called it a reunion, but that wasn't accurate. These men had never actually met. They had only shared a few moments in the sky that changed both their lives forever. When they met at a Seattle hotel, they embraced like brothers. Brown introduced Stigler to his crew members who were still alive. Each one thanked the German pilot for their lives, for their children, for their grandchildren, all of whom existed because of Stigler's decision not to pull the trigger. The 2 pilots became inseparable friends. They appeared together at military reunions, schools, and documentaries. They called each other every week. Their wives became friends. Their children became friends. 2 men who had met as enemies in the skies over Germany became closer than brothers. People often asked Stigler if he regretted his decision. After all, he could have had his Knight's Cross. He could have been a celebrated ace. His answer was always the same: I had the Knight's Cross in my heart. That was enough. When people asked Brown what he thought about German soldiers after meeting Stigler, he would say, Franz taught me that there was honor even in war. He taught me that enemies are just people forced to fight each other. He taught me that humanity can survive even in humanity's darkest hour. In the last years of their lives, the two pilots made a pact. When one died, the other would attend the funeral and tell their story one last time, ensuring it would never be forgotten. Franz Stigler died on March 22, 2008, at the age of 92. Charlie Brown was too ill to attend the funeral, but he sent a message that was read aloud. Franz did what he thought was right. Even at the risk of his life, he did what was honorable. He was my brother. Charlie Brown died 8 months later on November 24, 2008. At his funeral, the story of December 20th, 1943, was told in full. Veterans who had flown in World War II wept at the tale of two enemies who chose honor over orders. Their story might have remained a footnote in history, but author Adam Makos heard about it and spent years researching every detail. His book, A Higher Call, brought Franz and Charlie's story to the world. Finally, after 7 decades, the world learned about a moment when the better angels of human nature triumphed in the midst of mechanized slaughter. Military historians have studied the incident extensively. They point out how extraordinary Stigler's decision was. By late 1943, the air war had become incredibly brutal. Allied bombers were devastating German cities. German fighters were slaughtering bomber crews. Mercy was virtually extinct at 25,000 feet. Yet Franz Stigler looked at Olde Pub and saw not an enemy bomber, but 10 human beings struggling to survive. He saw himself in them, young men far from home, fighting a war they hadn't started, just trying to make it through another day. Some German veterans criticized Stigler when the story became public. How could he have let enemies escape? They could have returned to bomb Germany again. But Stigler would respond, "I didn't see enemies. I saw men. Boys, really. Someone's sons. I couldn't murder them." The United States Air Force has studied the Olde Pub incident as an example of honor in warfare. It's taught at the Air Force Academy as a reminder that even in war, individual choices matter. One person choosing compassion over violence can ripple through generations. Think about it. Because Franz Stigler chose not to fire his cannons, 8 American airmen survived. Those men went on to have families. Their children had children. Today, hundreds of people are alive because of a decision made in 3 seconds over Germany in 1943. The B-17 Olde Pub never flew again after that December 20th mission. The damage was too extensive. It was scrapped for parts to keep other bombers flying, but its legacy lived on in the men who survived and the story they eventually told. Today, the incident is commemorated at military museums around the world. At the National Museum of the United States Air Force, a special exhibit tells the story of Charlie Brown and Franz Stigler. At the Vancouver airport, where Stigler lived his final years, a plaque honors his act of wartime chivalry. But perhaps the most powerful memorial is the one that exists in the hearts of military aviators worldwide. When pilot training emphasizes honor over victory, when soldiers choose mercy over murder, when enemies recognize each other's humanity, that's the legacy of December 20th, 1943. The story of Olde Pub reminds us that war doesn't destroy humanity, it reveals it. In the most extreme circumstances, when killing is not just allowed but ordered, some individuals still choose compassion. Franz Stigler could have been the 28th Victory Ace with a Knight's Cross. Instead, he became something far more important, proof that honor can exist even in the machinery of death. Charlie Brown never forgot that salute from Franz Stigler as he peeled away over the North Sea. For 40 years, he wondered about the German pilot who had saved them. When they finally met, Brown asked Stigler why he had risked everything to save an enemy crew. Stigler's answer was simple. "I saw you were terribly injured. I saw your gunner was dead. I saw you were struggling to fly. I thought to myself, if I was in that plane, I would want someone to let me go home. So I let you go home." If you've watched this incredible story of honor between enemies, share it with someone who needs to hear that humanity can survive even in the darkest times. Subscribe to the Old Breed channel for more untold stories from military history that remind us what honor, courage, and compassion really mean. Did you know that Franz Stigler and Charlie Brown's children still stay in contact today, considering themselves an extended family born from a moment of mercy at 20,000 feet? Their father's decision to choose humanity over hate created a bond that transcends generations. That December day in 1943, two enemies looked at each other across the Gulf of War and recognized a fundamental truth. We are all human beings first, enemies second. In choosing not to kill when killing would have been easy, Franz Stigler wrote himself into history not as a fighter ace, but as something far more rare and precious, a warrior who knew when not to fight. And Charlie Brown, by keeping the secret for 40 years to protect his enemy, proved that honor isn't limited by uniform or nationality. These two men never flew together, never fought side by side, never shared a foxhole. They shared something far more powerful, a moment of grace in the midst of grotesque violence, a flicker of light in history's darkest hour. The next time someone tells you there's no honor in war, tell them about December 20th, 1943. Tell them about Franz Stigler and Charlie Brown. Tell them about Ye Olde Pub and a salute between enemies that echoes through generations. Tell them that sometimes, just sometimes, humanity wins.